Do the balls of the Searing Exarch really get on your nerves? This build doesn't mind them at all. This is my favourite build of all time, and that's because it actually tanks. Shaper or Elder Slams? Not a problem. Just stand there and take it. And just because we tank doesn't mean we don't do any damage. This thing absolutely wrecks enemies with about 4 million DPS. Okay, so it tanks and kills bosses, but clear's got to be terrible, right? Not even slightly. So what's the catch? Well, it's a little more expensive than my average build, coming in at 12 divines. But that doesn't mean you need 12 divines to actually build it. You can probably league start this. In this guide, I'm going to show you how to build the budget version and then scale it up into the powerhouse that you see in this video. And please note the build in this guide is nowhere near finished. It can scale even further, which I will be doing throughout the end of this league. I think I may go for 100. This build is based on BoneShatter. With this we hit the enemy, and as we hurt them, we hurt ourselves. As we hit the enemy, BoneShatter builds up stacks. The more stacks we have, the more damage we do to the enemy, and the more damage we do to ourselves. During a boss fight, we'll be hitting ourselves over 5 times a second at 7.2k physical damage per hit. Which, let's face it, is quite a lot of damage considering we don't even have that much health. To our rescue is a ton of mitigation, which helps us mitigate all the other damage coming in as well. But before we jump into defences, let's talk about our main 6-link. First, you guessed it, it's BoneShatter. And if money is no object, go for the Divergent version. This will increase our attack speed by 1% per stack of trauma. During a boss fight, we can get over 30 of these. I haven't got this yet, but I will be upgrading to it as soon as I can afford it. Next, we have Brutality. This is a huge damage increase, but causes us to do nothing but physical, which is good because we want to stun a lot. Stunning is what makes our skill clear. When we stun, a shockwave pulses out from the target, hitting everything around us for lots of damage. And because the way we got our tree and some of the gems set up, we don't just hit one target, we hit many. This leads to multiple overlapping pulses. Next up we have melee physical damage. On top of this we have Ruthless for every third attack to deal much more damage than the previous two. Continuing the stun theme, we're going for Endurance Charge on melee stun. This lowers the enemy's stun threshold, meaning we get even more stuns and even more pulses. It's also a way of generating endurance charges. And last but by no means least is Impale. This allows us to record some of our high physical damage and replay it with each hit. Always nice for extra damage. Not really part of the 6-link, but I have to mention it here. We also use Ancestral Cry, Warcry. This causes us to hit 2 more enemies, as well as giving us a ton of armour and some nice strike range. And that's really it for the offences. BoneShatter really is a great way of creating damage on high tank builds. Along with attack speed, really does allow us to hit really fast, causing our stacks to build up much more quickly, causing more shockwaves. Everything just feels so much better. Okay, the multiple defensive layers of this build. First, we have almost 100,000 armour, which is ridiculous. This causes us to only take a fraction of the total physical damage we take, with the rest of it just being ignored. As BoneShatter's trauma stack damage also classes as a hit, this comes off our armour. Our second layer of defences comes in the form of resistances, but not just any resistances. Our resistances have the cap lifted to 85% for cold and lightning and 87% for fire. This is an extra 10% elemental damage that just vanishes. On top of this we have determination, which just gives us more armour, and arctic armour, which reduces our physical intake by 21% less. It also reduces our fire intake, which is huge for the Searing Exarch fight. We also have a further flat 20% reduction in damage from Fortify. And no build designed to take loads of physical damage is going to go without endurance charges. We have 4 charges up all of the time. The next layer of defences is incredibly important. Without it, we would drop dead over and over again. It is Leech, and we have a lot of it. On top of this, our build is also pulling in 2,530 life regen per second on average. Note that this is on average. At peak, we will get 8,386 life regen, meaning that 2,500 is not actually constant. A lot of our damage comes back every 4 seconds or 10 seconds. You may be thinking that this sounds bad, but it isn't. Big bosses aren't able to chunk us down, so what actually happens is our life starts to drop a little lower in long fights, and then all of a sudden we'll get a push back up to full. The reason that bosses can't chunk us down is our next layer of defense. We take no extra damage from critical strikes. And critical strikes are those hits that normally one-shot players. Thankfully they don't affect us at all, we don't have to deal with them, and so it makes the build feel supremely safe, especially while mapping in tier 16s. I can guarantee that if you die in a tier 16 map with this build built the same way I've built it, you are doing something wrong or you've picked the wrong map modifiers. Now that is not to say we are invincible. The beams in the Cyrus fight that increase the damage we take are pretty lethal. I also envisage that the beams that shut down life regen and leech in the Maven fight will also cause us some serious problems. I also lost a life in the Shaper fight because I tried to tank bullet hell. This did not go well. However, if you play normally and don't try to do anything cataclysmically stupid like that, you will survive the Shaper fight with ease. Note on the Elder fight, nothing in this fight can kill me. I can literally face tank all of it. For our final layers of defences, we need to look at our ascendancies. We are a Juggernaut. And for our first skill, we're going for Undeniable. This gives us increased accuracy rating and equates some of that to attack speed, which is great on this build. It helps us hit things really well in the early game. Without it, it feels a bit sluggish. Next, we go for Untiring. This gives us 40% increased life regeneration rate. On top of this, it also causes the trauma stacks from BoneShatter to become somewhat advantageous to us, in that we regen 1.5% of the physical damage mitigated through our armour as life per second. Before killing the final Katava, make sure that the armour on your chest is above something like 800. Providing it is, we're going for Unbreakable. This doubles the armour we get from your body armour. 8% of our armour now works against elemental damage. And lastly, we're going for Unstoppable. This gives us 10% increased movement speed, and the best defences of all, practically nothing in the game can now slow us down. And we can also not be stunned. This also means we're immune to chill and freeze. And best of all, we can now do temporal chain maps without any effect on us. Before we move on to the gear where most of our defences will be realised, we're going to take a look at the other skill gens. For our aura setup, we have Determination, Pride and Arctic Armour, all linked to a level 3 Enlighten. You can get away with a level 2 Enlighten at a push. I dropped my Enlighten so it didn't cost me anything. We're also going to have one aura that reserves our life, and the reason for this will become clear once we start talking about the tree. Our last aura will be Precision linked to Arrogance. This increases our accuracy rating as well as our critical strike chance. It also allows us to increase our maximum resistances by +1 to all elements. Next, our totem setup, and this is a Panopticon build, so this is very important for our damage. We have Ancestral Protector, linked to multiple totems, linked to Val Ancestral Warchief. Whenever we enter a new part of the arena, drop an Ancestral Protector, then drop Ancestral Warchief. If Val Ancestral Warchief is up, save it for a boss and then hit that as well. This gives us so much attack speed and melee physical damage, it isn't funny. You want to make sure these are up all the time. For our cast when damage taken setup, we're going to go cast when damage taken, linked to life tap, vulnerability, and molten shell. This will give us a ton more armour, as well as making enemies more vulnerable to our physical damage. And now the solo skills that don't need to be linked to anything. The first one is Blood Rage. This gives us increased leech, but also increased attack speed, and Frenzy Charge generation for even more attack speed. Next, in the vein of attack speed, we're going Val Haste. This will be up every so often, especially for bosses, gives us increased attack speed and helps us kill them quicker. Ancestral Cry, we talked about this in the offensive section, so I won't go over this again here. And let's not forget our movement skill, which is Leap Slam. And now the bit you've all been waiting for, the gear. This build uses 2 unique items, one of them is super rare, so this build probably isn't going to work for solo self-fan players unless you manage to drop one. The most important piece of gear in this build for the defences is the Brass Dome. This gives us so much armour it isn't funny. My version of the chest has 4030 armour, which is then doubled through the ascendances. It also prevents us from taking any extra damage from critical strikes, which would be so many nodes on the tree if you tried to achieve the same thing just from the tree. And the most important thing it gives us is up to 5 all max res. This is huge for defences. What makes the chest expensive is the +5 resistance rolls. If you can't afford it, then go for a lower number and then upgrade later. This was 5 divines at the beginning of the league, however, right now it's currently a divine, so if you are only starting this build now, your build will be a lot cheaper than mine was. The next unique item is the gloves that came out this league, the Tanu Ahi Rhyme Scale Gauntlets. These give us almost always up Onslaught and Adrenaline. Onslaught is going to increase our movement and attack speed, but Adrenaline is super important for survivability. It gives us 100% increased damage, 25% increased attack, cast and movement speed, and 10% increased physical damage reduction. The most expensive thing on our build by far is going to be the two-handed axe. On this, as a minimum, you want increased attack speed of at least 20%, added flat physical, and increased physical damage. I also elected to go for +1 to level of all socketed gems, a little bit of critical strike chance, and some accuracy. The accuracy isn't so important once you switch to precision. All of the other gear has one main purpose: increase our resistances, get as much life as possible, and do not neglect chaos resistance. We want this at the 75% cap. In addition, we're going to pick up any stats that we're missing. These are probably going to be dexterity and intelligence, as we have quite a lot of strength on the tree. In addition to this, on our boots we're going to want 30% increased movement speed, and on our amulet and rings look for physical damage to attacks, and also accuracy. For the anointment on the amulet, if you don't have Enlighten yet, then feel free to get Sovereignty temporarily. Once you do have Enlighten to level 3, then you can switch this out for something like Discipline and Training for much more life. If you don't think you need more life, then feel free to go for something like Vanquisher. And it goes without saying that we're going to want as much armour on our gear as we can stack. All of your items should have a little bit of armour. If you do have armour and evasion bases, then don't worry, we do get something on the tree that converts all our evasion to armour. For our flasks, we're going to want a sulphur flask for increased damage, but also consecrated ground for recharge, a quicksilver flask so we can move quickly, a granite flask for the extra armour, and a basalt flask for even more armour. On 2 of these flasks, you're going to want chance to avoid being shocked during effect. You want this to add up to 100% across the 2 flasks. On each of the flasks, you also want the roll gain 3 charges when you are hit by an enemy. Other things you're going to want to look for is increased critical strike during effect, increased attack speed during effect, and immunity to bleed and corrupted blood. Our last flask is also going to be a divine life flask. Onto the tree now, and as we can see, it's pretty compact. Now the Masteries do make up a large chunk of defense, so let's go through those first. For Life Mastery, we take plus 50 to maximum life. For Fortify Mastery, melee hits fortify, minus 3 to maximum fortification. On the Attack Mastery, we go non-val strike skills, target 1 additional nearby enemy. You must get this one before you switch over to BoneShatter or it feels really bad. Armour Mastery, plus 1 to all elemental resistances if equipped helmet, body armour, gloves and boots all have armour. Reservation Mastery, plus 1 to all elemental resistances if you have reserved life and mana, and that's why we reserved life with precision. Physical Mastery, 10% more maximum physical attack damage. Armour and Evasion Mastery, every 4 seconds regenerate life equal to 1% of armour and evasion rating over 1 second. Two-Handed Mastery, 10% increased armour per red socket on main hand weapon, 10% increased evasion rating per green socket on main hand weapon. Totem Mastery, buffs from active Ancestral totems linger for 3 seconds. This is just a massive quality of life improvement. Basically we can jump around a little bit more without dropping our totems so frequently. Axe Mastery, attacks with axes or swords grant 1 rage on hit no more than once every 3 seconds. Now I was torn between picking axes and staves, but I went with axes because of this node. Now to the keystones, of which we chose 2. The first is Iron Reflexes. This converts all evasion rating to armour. And second, Call to Arms. This makes our Warcry instant, which means our Ancestral Warcry can go on the left mouse button. Now we do go for a large, 2 medium and a small cluster jewel. I do strongly suggest you go with these, you can't get anywhere near this amount of damage without them. For the large cluster jewel, we want to go for Heavy Hitter for increased attack damage, reduced enemy stun threshold, double stun duration and increased damage with elements from attack skills. For our second notable, we want to go for Drive the Destruction. This gives us 0.8% of attack damage leached as life, 25% increased attack damage when on full life, and attacks have 10% chance to maim on hit, which is a 10% more multiplier. Now I did roll this cluster myself, so the last node isn't optimal. We got Aggressive Defense. This gives us increased fortification duration, 20% increased damage with attacks while fortified, and fortifying hits grant 60% increased fortification. Now the base for this is an eye level 64, axe attacks deal 12% increased damage with hits and elements, and sword attacks deal 12% increased damage with hits and elements. The 2 medium cluster jewels need to be at an eye level of 75. They should have 4 passive skills, 5 at a push, and we want added small passive skills grant 15% increased critical strike chance. The notables we want on these are Basics of Pain for 20% increased damage and 30% increased critical strike chance, and Quick Getaway for 5% increased attack and cast speed, increased movement speed if you've dealt a critical strike recently, and 25% increased critical strike chance. Note that only one of my cluster jewels is optimal. On the small cluster jewel we want 6% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. It should have 2 nodes, and the notable we want is Destructive Aspect for reduced mana reservation efficiency of Pride. You could also go for the Determination one. For the small notables, we want to go for either Life Regen or Flat Life, and Chaos Resistance. For jewels, except for one of these, we want to go life, attack speed, damage. One of your jewels will need physical damage leached as mana. If you don't have this, the build will not operate properly. For Pantheons, I go Soul of Lunaris as my main. This should be fully upgraded. And for my minor, whilst I do change that occasionally, most of the time I'm on Soul of Tukahama. This gives us 3% increased physical damage reduction per second. We've been stationary up to a maximum of 9%. Also allows us to regenerate 2% of life per second while stationary. Okay, the map mods we want to watch out for. Do not run these unless you want to die. Physical Reflect. That's instant death. Reduce life and mana regeneration at 60%. Lower than this, we can cope with. 60% is a bit on the edge of death. Players are cursed with vulnerability. This causes us to take more physical damage, and that's bad. Whilst we can technically run cannot regenerate life and energy shield because of our leech, I wouldn't recommend it. You will die occasionally while doing this. The last thing to avoid is too many rolls that give physical damage as extra damage. You can cope with one roll of this, 2 or 3 it starts to get a bit ugh. Leveling the build. We want to pick Marauder obviously. Run Ground Slam till level 12. Then we're going to switch to Sunder until we've got both the attack mastery that gives us non-val skills, target one additional nearby enemy, and we've also got the inexorable notable. Once we've got these, we can then switch over to BoneShatter. If you'd like a detailed leveling guide for this, then please leave a comment below and I'll see what I can do. For bandits, if you're league starting, go for a Lyra, and if you're not, kill them all. You've been watching Altec2k Gaming. These guides take a ton of time to make. If you've enjoyed it, then please tickle that like button, and if you've been here a few times, why not subscribe? And with that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.